What a mother is prepared to do to protect her child, to obtain justice for her child, and to take revenge. The mother of 22-year-old Julie Hog proved to the world that a mother's love knows no bounds, and the abuser of her daughter was subsequently punished to the fullest extent. This story took place in November 1989 in Birmingham, a town in the county of Durham in the northeast of England. Julie Hog was born on February 22, 1967, as the daughter of Charlie and Anne Ming. Julie was the middle child. She had an older brother named Gary and a younger sister named Angela. The children had a very normal, happy childhood. Compared to her brother and sister, Julie was the quietest and most serene child. She didn't have many friends, but she had several female friends to whom she was very close. Julie caused her parents no problems, neither in school nor at home. She behaved well, was an obedient girl and a diligent student. In high school, however, Julie's behavior changed. She became a moody teenager. Her mood changed with the speed of the wind, and all these emotional fluctuations were reflected in the people who were close to her. Behind bright, provocative clothes, high heels, and unusual hairstyles, Julie hid her modesty and shyness. She didn't try to dress like most of her peers, but followed her own sense of fashion and style. At that time, Julie was into punk rock, and her idol was the British singer and composer Boy George, who liked to stand out from the crowd even as a child. Julie liked to combine the incompatible and to look daring. As she got older, she began to hide her shyness behind stubbornness. If she believed she was right about something, she always stood firm and didn't let others dissuade her from her opinion. At the same time, Julie was very loyal and had a good sense of humor. Her mother, Anne, still remembers her daughter's infectious laughter, which would erupt at the most inappropriate moments. Shortly after her high school graduation, Julie met a young man named Andrew Hogg, who later became her husband. Andrew was also from Birmingham. They met at a local youth club and immediately took a liking to each other. In 1985, when Julie turned 18, they got married. The Ming family approved of this marriage. The parents liked the calm and well-mannered Andrew, who was a very good match for their daughter's energy. The newlyweds moved into a new house on Grange Avenue in Birmingham, and just a few months after the wedding, Julie found out she was pregnant. In 1986, little Kevin saw the light of day. Some spouses grow closer with the birth of a child, but Julie and Andrew distanced themselves from each other. They started arguing about all sorts of things, and each defended their own point of view and didn't try to listen to the other. As it later turned out, the relationship between the young parents was on the verge of collapse after the birth of the child. Each of the spouses did everything that irritated and angered the other. The problem was that both Andrew and Julie were not yet mature enough to start a family. Faced with the first difficulties, their marriage burst at the seams. They had to adjust to their new life as parents, although they were basically still children themselves. The Hogg couple gradually drifted apart and finally decided to separate. Soon after, in 1989, Andrew got a job in London and moved there. That was quite far away, about 5 hours' drive from the county. Despite the distance, Andrew wanted to maintain regular contact with his son Kevin, who was 3 years old at the time. When this incident occurred, Julie and Andrew were planning to initiate legal separation proceedings. Such an agreement was an alternative to divorce if the parties were unsure about the state of their marriage, but wanted to establish financial boundaries and responsibilities. Julie was just about to tackle the matter. On Thursday, November 16, 1989, Anne had come to her daughter's house on Grange Avenue the previous day, November 15, to pick up her grandson and have him stay over. Julie had the evening shift. She worked as a pizza delivery driver at a local pizzeria. While Anne was dressing Kevin, Julie asked her mother to call her the next morning and make sure she was awake. The young woman intended to go to court to apply for a separation from her husband Andrew. She had to be there by 10 a.m. So she asked her mother to call her at 9:30 a.m. Anne wanted to pick up her daughter to take her to the appointment and support her if needed. In the evening, Anne took her grandson Kevin to her home and Julie went to work at the pizzeria. Her shift ended late at night. The young woman was brought home by one of her colleagues. He saw Hogg go to the front door and insert the key to unlock it. It was about 2:30 a.m. at home. Julie probably went straight to bed, as she had to get up early the next morning. But when morning came, her daughter did not answer her mother's call. Anne didn't pay much attention to it as she thought that Julie was still asleep and tired from work. She waited another 15 minutes and dialed the number again, but again no one answered. At that moment, Anne put little Kevin in the car and drove directly to her daughter's house. When she parked and got out of the car, she saw that the front door was locked. One thing Anne immediately noticed was that all the curtains on the windows were drawn, which meant that her daughter wasn't up yet. The woman went around the house and knocked on the back door. Anne called her daughter's name, but nothing helped. There was dead silence in the house. Finally, Anne decided to call her son Gary, Julie's older brother. The young man worked near his sister's house and could get into the house through the window. Anne didn't know what to do and panicked. She wished someone would come and help her solve the problem. Perhaps Julie had fallen ill and couldn't answer the phone. Perhaps something had happened to her. She had fallen and now needed help. Various thoughts went through the mother's head while she waited for her son's arrival. Gary quickly made his way to Grange Avenue. To get into the house, he broke a pane of glass in the back door. The young man ran around both floors, but his sister was nowhere to be found. He found the cleanliness and order that prevailed in all the rooms strange. Julie was normally messy, especially when she was getting ready in the morning. She wasn't the type to make her bed after waking up. She might leave clothes on the bed, spread out her makeup, and not put it away. But now everything was neatly tidied up and it looked natural. Something about this perfect order wasn't right, and the whole situation with Julie's disappearance made absolutely no sense. This was a wake-up call for Anne, so the woman decided to go to the police and report that something had happened to her daughter. The trip to the police, however, was not very helpful. The officer explained that too little time had passed to file a missing person report. The mother was advised to wait a while. Julie would probably get in touch in the next few hours or contact her relatives by phone and explain everything. But Anne couldn't just sit back and wait idly while her daughter was possibly in trouble. So she and the rest of the family started calling Julie's friends and asking if they had information about Julie. Unfortunately, no one had met her that day. The family also contacted her work colleagues and the pizzeria. There they learned that the young woman had arrived home safely the night before around 2 a.m. A colleague explained that he had seen her put her key in the door and then left. Although Hogg had not been seen by anyone that day, the police did not take the missing person report seriously. One police officer even told Anne that Julie had probably gone to a nightclub for a drink and was still partying somewhere. This assumption was absurd. The officer would never have said that if he had known her personally. Julie knew she had to get up early for her court appointment. Under no circumstances would she risk her reputation and appear at a divorce hearing after a night of partying, especially when it involved custody of her son. Anne, however, had a feeling that something was wrong with her daughter, but the police wouldn't listen to her. Now another officer theorized that the young woman had decided to drop everything and move away to start a new life. Perhaps she didn't want to be found at all. But Anne knew that Julie, even in such a situation, would never leave her 3-year-old son behind. It took several days after Hogg's disappearance for the police to finally take action. The woman had been missing since the early morning hours of November 16 and was last seen by a colleague in front of her house on Grange Avenue. It wasn't until the following Monday that investigators decided to do something. They sent a forensic team to search the missing woman's apartment. If something bad had happened to her, it most likely happened there. When the worried mother called Julie's home phone during the search to ask the forensic team if they had found anything important there, the officer who answered the phone replied that no body had been found there. This sentence probably unsettled and angered the woman. She was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown because she was worried about her daughter, and now the officer had struck a nerve. In general, the work of the police at the beginning of the investigation was disgusting. One had the impression that the investigators still weren't taking Julie Hogg's disappearance seriously. A search of the house yielded nothing. The forensic examination revealed no signs that anything had happened to the mistress of the house. Neither blood nor signs of a struggle were found. They assured Anne that if Julie had met with foul play, it definitely hadn't happened in the house on Grange Avenue. The mystery of Julie Hogg's disappearance remained unsolved. What had happened to her? Where could she have gone? Could someone have had something to do with it? Anne and her family appeared on television several times, appealing to the public for information on Julie's whereabouts. The HCK case went through the media. The police conducted several interviews but learned nothing new. Soon, days without Julie turned into weeks and weeks into months. Christmas 1989 came, and the Ming family spent it in desperate prayers, as they still didn't know what had happened to Julie. The saddest part was that they had bought presents for her and placed them under the tree, hoping for a Christmas miracle. Her mother and father believed she would return safe and sound. The case of Hogg's disappearance was never solved. The police had no leads. That was until early 1990 when Anne, in a series of truly shocking events, made a horrifying discovery. She had found something no mother should ever find. Anne discovered her daughter's body towards the end of January 1990. Her ex-husband, Andrew Hogg, decided to visit his old house on the Green, which he had formerly shared with Julie. The apartment stood empty while the police continued to investigate the disappearance. At the end of January, Andrew received the keys back and decided to move in there with his son Kevin. The man went into the house to clean and tidy the rooms. He turned on the heating because it was winter and cold outside. While Andrew was cleaning, he noticed something horrifying, a smell coming from the bathroom on the first floor. The young man called Julie's mother and asked how he could get rid of the foul odor. The woman suspected that the smell was coming from the toilet as it hadn't been used for a long time. The mother-in-law advised her former son-in-law to pour some bleach into the toilet bowl and let it sit for a while, which he did. However, a few days passed, but the strong smell didn't disappear. Instead, it grew stronger. So Anne decided to find out for herself where the stench was coming from. As she climbed the stairs to the first floor and headed towards the bathroom, a nauseating smell immediately hit her nostrils. Anne instantly recognized that there was decomposing flesh somewhere in the house. The thing was, Anne was a longtime nurse, and through her decades of work in operating rooms and hospital wards, she knew all too well what a dead body smelled like. It wasn't a dirty toilet, something was decomposing in the upstairs bathroom. The mother approached the door, praying above all that it wasn't Julie. The woman entered the bathroom, looked around, and initially noticed nothing unusual. She looked under the sink and behind the toilet to find the source of the foul smell but found nothing. At some point, Anne leaned over the bathtub to sniff, and due to the pressure, a crack formed at the bottom, and the smell became even stronger. The smell was now so intense that it literally knocked her off her feet. The woman knelt down and forcibly pulled back the panel under the bathtub. There lay something wrapped in a blanket. Her instinct told her it was her daughter. Immediately, she began to scream, calling for Andrew, who was downstairs, and repeating that it was here under the bathtub. A few minutes later, the police arrived at the scene. They confirmed that indeed, the decomposing body of Julie Hog was under the bathtub. She had been lying there for months since the woman had been reported missing. When the police sent a forensic team in November to search the house in Greenhaven, they didn't think to remove the panel under the bathtub, and the grieving mother faced another gruesome ordeal when she discovered her child's body. Anne sued the Cleveland police for their terrible conduct throughout the investigation, from refusing to take Julie's case seriously from the beginning to the fact that they literally had a body under their noses. The Ming family and Andrew Hogg were paid a sum for moral damages, But no amount of money could undo the failures of the police investigation and what Julie's mother had to endure. The case of disappearance naturally turned into one of manslaughter or even murder. It was obvious that it was a crime because someone had hidden Julie's body under the bathtub, hoping it would never be found. One of the first suspects was, of course, the ex-husband, Andrew Hogg. The man was immediately arrested and brought in for questioning. However, after ensuring his alibi was solid, he was eventually ruled out. It was clear that he had nothing to do with Julie's massacre, and so the hunt for the real perpetrator began. During the investigation, the police sent the blanket Julie's body was wrapped in for forensic examination and found foreign fibers that matched the fibers of the fabric used to make club shirts for men. These shirts were worn by club athletes in Billinge and by other members of the community. This gave the police the first clue that the perpetrator could be a rugby player or a member of the club. Investigators quickly managed to identify a group of men in the community who called themselves the Crazy Gang. At least, that's what the locals called them because of their crazy antics. They were known as a rowdy bunch of often drunk men who invited strippers to bachelor parties and rugby club parties. The members of the Crazy Gang didn't have a good reputation in Billinge, so investigators decided to summon every member of the group for questioning and one by one eliminate them from the list of suspects. Only a single gang member was not questioned because he was hiding from the police. His name was Billy Dunlop. Billy was born in March 1963 and was 26 years old at the time of Julie Hogg's death. He was about 4 years older than her. Dunlop was born in County Durham and grew up there with 3 siblings. The upbringing in the Dunlop family was very strict. The father punished the children for every provocation and often resorted to physical violence. Obviously, Billy was shaped by his father. As an adolescent, he developed into an aggressive and very short-tempered man, which led to numerous problems with the police. Once he was arrested for kicking a man in the face. In Billinge, the rumor went around that he had decapitated a dog because it had barked at him. Whether this was actually the case is not known, but many people in the town were simply afraid of him. Billy was instantly furious and aggressive if provoked in any way. Most importantly, however, Dunlop had previously known Julie Haw, and they even had an affair after the woman separated from her husband. It ended very quickly because Julie didn't want a serious relationship. At the time of her death, Billy lived literally around the corner from Hogg's house in Greenshaven. He rented a room in his friend's house. All these circumstances immediately made Billy Dunlop the prime suspect. Investigators began to find out what the man was doing on the night Julie was attacked to determine if he had the opportunity to commit the crime. On the evening of November 15, while Hogg was working at the pizzeria, Billy Dunlop was relaxing at a bachelor party at the Billinger Rugby Club with the rest of the Crazy Gang. They had, as usual, hired a stripper to perform for them while the men drank alcohol. Billy, who had drunk a bit too much, climbed onto the stage with the dancer and tried to have sexual intercourse with her, which frightened her. When they began to pull him off the stage, he got into a brawl with several men. The club's security threw Dunlop onto the street. Out of sheer rage, Billy lunged at the closed door and hit his head against it so hard that he split his eyebrow. He even had to go to the hospital to be stitched up. Dunlop left the clinic on November 16 around 2:30 a.m., so approximately the time a colleague drove Julie home after her shift. The police therefore tried to find out where Billy spent the rest of the night. Since the man had no solid alibi for the time of the crime, investigators decided to search the premises where Dunlop rented accommodation. They wanted to find evidence linking him to Julie's massacre, and they found it. In the kitchen, under the floorboards, investigators found a set of keys to Hogg's house. It had not been found since Julie's disappearance, and it was suspected that the woman had locked the house and taken the keys with her. Several of Billy's fingerprints were found on the keys, but the evidence against him didn't end there either. In addition to the keys and fingerprints, an expert found traces of seminal fluid as well as some hairs on the blanket. The DNA was compared and partially matched Dunlop's. Of course, DNA comparison technology in 1990 was not yet 100% certain, but it was definitely further evidence against Billy. During Julie's autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that the woman had been forced to have sexual intercourse before her death. However, the official cause of death remained unclear, as the body had lain under the bathtub for several months and was severely decomposed. Most likely, it was strangulation. Based on the evidence found, Billy Dunlop was arrested and charged with killing Julie Hog. He denied any involvement in the young woman's death. The trial of Billy Dunlop began in May 1991, a year and a half after Julie's death. The prosecution presented its evidence, which clearly pointed to the defendant's guilt. However, the lawyers claimed that Billy Dunlop had been framed, asserting that the police had planted Dunlop's DNA to pin an unsolved crime on him. They also tried to cast Julie in a bad light, claiming the victim was an irresponsible young woman with a promiscuous sex life. According to the defense, HCK had dated various men after separating from her husband, including Dunlop, but that didn't mean he was the one who sent her to the other side of the world. Billy's trial essentially became a condemnation of the victim. The lawyers even blamed the dead woman for her own death, as if nothing would have happened to her if she hadn't been so promiscuous. This was the vilest of all defense strategies, blaming the victim for the crime. Billy Dunlop also testified during the trial. He insisted that he was clean before the law and had nothing to do with Julie's death. He was so convincing in his speech that, despite all the evidence against him, the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. For this reason, the judge had to order a retrial. With a new jury, Julie's family had to endure the entire grueling process a second time. The next trial began about 5 months after the first, in October 1991. Unfortunately, the result was the same. The new jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. Since this happened a second time, the judge decided to acquit Dunlop. This meant that even if new evidence against him emerged, Billy Dunlop could not be charged again for the same offense, and that he would never again stand trial for Julie's massacre. The Ming family was devastated. The mother of the deceased fainted in the courtroom when the judge announced the acquittal. It was a severe blow to Julie's parents. The man who had taken their daughter's life would go free without answering for his terrible actions. They knew he was the one who had taken their child's life, and now they heard he would get away with it unpunished. It looked as if Julie would never receive justice due to the British double jeopardy law. This law has been in force in England and Wales for about 800 years and was intended to prevent the police from abusing the justice system if a trial did not yield the desired result after an acquittal. Billy Dunlop gave a television interview in which he again protested his innocence and expressed his wish that the police reopen the case and find the real murderer. But that was not what Julie's family heard. Billy, in their opinion, was just bragging that he had committed the perfect crime. Just a few weeks after the end of the second trial, Dunlop rejoiced that he had gotten away with Julie's massacre. He was in high spirits and felt invincible because he was free after committing the most heinous crime. He knew exactly that under the double jeopardy law, he would never be convicted for Julie's death, and he could confess it to anyone because the police could do nothing else. Billy went on with his life and his joy, not caring about the trauma and devastation he had inflicted on the victim's family through his actions. The police knew this was not the last time they would hear from Billy Dunlop, as he was an incredibly violent and short-tempered man who constantly lost control. They sensed that this man would sooner or later step out of line again. And so it happened in 1997, 6 years after the acquittal. Billy Dunlop was jailed for a few months for threatening his ex-girlfriend, the mother of his children, with death. After his release from prison, he began a relationship with another woman named Donner. The affair didn't last long. Donner ended the relationship and found a new boyfriend named Shan. The fact that his girlfriend left him for another man made Billy Dunlop very angry. One day, he showed up at her apartment and began beating the young couple with a baseball bat. He hit Shan with such force that the wooden bat broke. Then Dunlop grabbed a fork and stabbed Donner multiple times. Donner and Shan luckily both survived. They suffered severe injuries. One of the stabs punctured a lung, and Shan had several fractures to his skull and had to undergo surgery to reconstruct his face. The only reason they survived was that Donner's brother and his friends came to the apartment. They stopped the attacker and called the police. If the brother had shown up just a little later, Billy would have completed his gruesome plan. Billy Dunlop was arrested and charged with attempted murder. He pleaded guilty only to assault and assured the court he had only wanted to scare his ex-girlfriend. He was eventually sentenced to only 7 years in prison. While Dunlop was behind bars, he wrote a letter to Donner, threatening to do the same to her as he had done to Julie Hog as soon as he was out. Donner immediately handed the threatening letter to the police, but due to the double jeopardy law, the authorities could do nothing in Julie's case. The investigators now knew with certainty that the man was guilty of the massacre and decided to charge him under a different article related to the offense, perhaps for perjury. If the police had somehow managed to elicit a confession from Billy Dunlop himself regarding Hogg's death, they would have been able to build a case against him and even prosecute him. At least that would have been a form of justice for Julie and her family. The investigators devised a plan. They learned that Billy had befriended one of the female prison officers while he was in prison for the attempted murder of Shan and Donner. The investigators provided the officer with a recording device to capture Dunlop's confession on film. After some time, they succeeded. The prisoner was summoned for questioning and directly asked what he had to do with Hogg's death. Billy, knowing that the law would not allow a reconviction for this act, honestly confessed that he was the one who had put Julie in her grave and even told how it had happened. Dunlop sat directly opposite the police officers and calmly recounted the terrible events of that night of November 16, 1989. After Billy left the hospital where his split eyebrow had been stitched, he went to his friend Mark, who lived on Grinch Avenue, but Mark was already asleep. The light was on in Hogg's house. Billy knocked on the door. Julie opened it, let him in, and offered him a cup of tea. They talked for a while as they sat in the kitchen, but then the woman started teasing him about his stitched eyebrow and his black eye. Billy became furious. The not entirely sober man lost control of himself, jumped from his chair, grabbed her by the throat, and strangled her to death. Dunlop did not want to comment to the police on how or when exactly he had sexual intercourse with the homeowner. However, he admitted that he took her life, then wrapped her in a blanket, and decided to hide her under the bathtub by unscrewing a panel. Billy cleaned the house to eliminate fingerprints and took the keys. He planned to return later and move the body to a safer place, which, however, he did not do. After the recorded confession, Dunlop was charged in 2 trials with perjury under oath. Julie's family hoped that he would receive the maximum possible sentence for this, to bring some measure of justice for their daughter. However, Billy was sentenced to only 6 years in prison for perjury. That was another disappointing result for the deceased's parents. But Julie's mother, Anne, transformed this pain and disappointment into determination. She didn't want to give up and allow this monster who had murdered her beautiful daughter to live on peacefully. The woman decided to do everything possible and impossible, but she would achieve justice in Julie's memory. The only way to ensure Billy Dunlop received the punishment he deserved was to change the double jeopardy law in Great Britain, and for that, Anne was prepared to sacrifice her own life. Julie's mother, who had just recovered from the shock of the trial, began a campaign to change the 800-year-old law. First, she met with the local Member of Parliament and then Home Secretary Jack Stowe. Then she wrote a letter to the Law Commission for England and and appealed to everyone who could help her in the fight for justice for her daughter. Anne also brought her campaign to the attention of the media and gave several television and radio interviews to gain as much public support as possible. Finally, she managed to take her campaign all the way to Parliament and the House of Lords. The woman participated in every debate to make her point of view on amending the law clear. The mother of the young woman who died had campaigned for several years. Despite all the setbacks she had to endure, she never gave up. And all the hard work finally paid off. The double jeopardy law was finally amended and came into force in April 2006, 17 years after Julie was murdered. Ming had fought for this for more than a decade and a half. The amendment meant that offenders like Billy Dunlop could now be re-indicted and retried for the same offense if the police had compelling new evidence that was not available during the original investigation. This could, for example, be evidence related to the development of new technologies in forensic science, such as DNA matching. Fortunately, it was decided that the law change would be retroactive, meaning it would not only apply to future offenders but could also be applied to older cases, like the Hogg case. Now Anne was finally on the way to putting the man who had taken her daughter's life behind bars forever. When the double jeopardy law was repealed, the police already had new and incriminating evidence against Billy Dunlop, especially his numerous confessions to various people. Dunlop, protected by the double jeopardy law, did not suspect that all this bragging would backfire on him. Before the police could charge Billy, they had to have the original acquittal overturned. In May 2006, they appealed to the court and very quickly achieved the overturning of the verdict. When Dunlop was charged with the massacre of Julie Hog, he initially pleaded not guilty. Later, however, he changed his plea and pleaded guilty, hoping for a lesser sentence. In October 2007, Billy Dunlop was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 22-year-old Julie Hog. He would only be eligible for parole 17 years later. Billy Dunlop was the first person in the United Kingdom in 800 years to be tried for the same offense. The case went down in British history, and that is to the credit of Julie's mother, Ming. Without her, the young woman would never have obtained justice for the terrible loss of her life. The law change also helped many other victims' families to obtain their rights. Since Ming's campaign, the law change has led to more than a dozen convictions. This woman can be incredibly proud of herself. Her hard work was recognized in October 2007 when King Charles awarded her the Order of the British Empire at Buckingham Palace. Julie's son Kevin was just 3 years old when his mother was taken from him. Due to his age, the boy couldn't remember her at all and only knew her from old photos in the family album. Andrew, Julie's ex-husband, decided not to tell his son exactly how his mother had died. He explained she had died in an accident when she came out of the bathroom. The father didn't want to further affect the child's sensitive psyche, but Andrew couldn't shield his son from this information for the rest of his life. As a teenager, Kevin learned the truth from his classmates. Friends told him that his mother hadn't died as a result of an accident but had her life taken. At this point, Andrew and the rest of the family decided it was time to tell Kevin the truth. The father's attempt to shield his son from the terrible story proved to be a terrible trauma for the teenager. Kevin was shocked that the true reason for his mother's death had been withheld from him. It is suspected that Julie's life was not the only one stolen by Billy Dunlop. He was suspected of killing another woman, 18-year-old Tina Ball, who disappeared in June 1989, just a few months before Julie Hog's disappearance. Tina was camping with her younger brother in a tent in a garden near her home in Billinge. She had gone to a local shop to buy sweets for John but did not return. She simply vanished. Tina's remains were discovered 10 months later on an undeveloped plot of land near her home. One of the last people Tina was seen alive with was none other than Billy Dunlop. Despite extensive police investigations, the case remains unsolved to this day. Many believe that Dunlop probably had more victims that simply no one knows about. Today, he is 60 years old. His minimum sentence of 17 years recently ended in June 2024. A parole hearing was supposed to decide whether Billy would remain behind bars or be released on parole. However, the Ministry of Justice has postponed the hearing indefinitely. The story of Ming and her years-long fight for justice has inspired many people through her perseverance. She has proven that a mother's love is boundless and can work wonders. Thank you for watching and take care.